We're live.
Okay, we are live. So it's in here. And we're going to spend some time with the chair of the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. The final report was issued on December 15th. And I guess, and we have Jay Nichols with us, who will introduce himself in a minute. And I guess we want you just to kind of walk us through the key elements of the report that you want to make sure that we get embedded in our brains. Yeah. We all know each other, so we'll actually maybe some people watching don't know everybody, so I guess look at the usual. Over in that empty seat would be Senator Ron Hinsdale. She may be joining us, but next to her.
Hi, Jay. Nodder.
Well, I'm just thinking about people watching.
Oh,
Or
Senator King Windows down. Sorry, it's Friday.
Yeah.
You're already there, huh?
Good afternoon, Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
And Terry Williams representing Rutland County.
And then Seth Baumgarth representing the Bennington Senate District.
Steve Heckerman representing the Addison County District.
It's definitely Friday afternoon. Okay, you are on. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Do you want me to share my screen or are you all set?
Well, we have the report, unless you have slides as opposed to the report.
I don't have slides. I'm just thinking about people at home, but I don't need to share it, and I don't know if I'm technologically capable of doing it correctly, but it's up to you, Senator.
It's posted, right?
It's posted.
It's posted. So go ahead, Jay. We don't have to share.
Okay, so Jay Nichols, I'm the executive director of the VPA, but I'm here today as a chair on the Commission on the Future of Public Education of Vermont.
By the way,
task is,
just for people watching, VPA is the Vermont Principals Association, right? Yeah.
that's
yep.
correct. Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
I'm really trying to come at this from the commission, but you're right. I represent the Vermont Principals Association in my regular job. Here today, I'm representing the commission, which was made up of a number of people that were appointed by the legislative body and the governor's administration. The vice chair of the commission is Chair of Health Education, Peter Conlon. I don't think he's going to make it today, but he said he might drop in, so we'll see if he shows up in your room. So essentially, can you hear me okay? I'm using the earbuds, so.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. The commission had essentially 5 areas to provide findings for consideration for the General Assembly. And I'm just going to go through the recommendations. If that works for the committee, I'll do the first one and then stop and let you ask any questions or make any comments you want. Is that cadence work for you folks?
Yes.
Okay. So the first section for the committee was charged with was recommendations for what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of local control and what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of state level control. So I'm not going to read through this, but I'm going to touch on some highlights. We continue, the commission believes that policy level decisions should continue to be made at the local level, with the understanding that some policies will be established through legislation and or rules by the state board. We believe that the policies that are required must be approved by school districts with the understanding that they must at least be as stringent as the state's model policies. We also believe that the vision for public education should be jointly set at the state level by the state board and the agency of education, with opportunities for meaningful engagement by educators and members of the public. And the commission reaffirmed its responsibility of the General Assembly and the administration to work in concert to ensure that the state board and AOE are sufficiently resourced to co-lead this work. If we're serious about education transformation, we need to make sure that the Agency of Education and the State Board of Education have the resources necessary to do the work that they need to do. We also feel that local school districts, regardless of what size those new districts might be, should be provided with autonomy and the authority to implement and adhere to the vision and standards for public education set by the state of Vermont. And that the state should provide appropriate levels of oversight and professional learning and resources to help the districts meet statewide strategic priorities. The commission recognizes that this is a significant consideration that warrants further exploration and discussion between the General Assembly, the AOE, and the state board. So in a way of example, if the state board says, we want to do X in reading, and these are the standards that are going to be followed in reading, and the agency needs the resources to help the field and professional learning to implement that, then as a state, we need to provide the resources necessary so that happens and that districts are not left completely on their own. We also agreed that the state should create a standardized, simple ballot format for the electorate to use when voting on any budget amount, in addition to the amounts of funds provided to the district. This is what we call the supplemental spending. So any district that wants to spend more than whatever the educational opportunity payment from the state is, assuming we go to the foundation formula, that would be voted on by the members of a community. Remember that if we make this change, they're not going to be voting on school budgets anymore. The school budget amount is going to be told to them. But if they decide in whatever their new district configuration is that they want to spend more than that, then they would have the opportunity to go to the voters up to a certain percentage. And there's language in Appendix D of the full report that shows what the ballot could look like. And you folks will be having some talk and testimony on that. I know that the tax commissioner's office is going to want to talk to you a little bit about that as well. We were split a little bit on that language, and you'll see that in the appendix. And here's what the bottom line comes to. Although we agree on most of the language, about half the members of the commission felt that the last part of the ballot should just say the supplemental education spending is going to be an increase of X dollars above the amount of the foundation formula. The other half of the commission said we should also have language in there that says, and we expect that to increase your tax rate per $100 by X. And we were pretty split over that. So that's a decision that if we move forward with Act 73 in a simplified ballot, that the General Assembly is going to have to address. This is a big one. We also came to the conclusion as a commission, not unanimously, but pretty close, that the state should couple health insurance collective bargaining with negotiations on salaries and other compensation. So although the commission did not have time to take testimony on the issue, the majority of commission members felt that compensation and benefits, including health insurance, should be negotiated collectively at the same level. Now, we did not decide or make a recommendation. Should that be done at the state level for both insurance and other compensation for teachers and other school district employees, or should it all be done at the local level? But the feeling, the majority felt that it should be at one level or the other. And that's the end of A. Do you have questions in section A that you'd like to ask or comments?
Any questions so far? Okay, I don't, not so far, Jay.
Okay, everybody's okay with what we mean by coupling?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the second area that we are asked to report on will be any necessary updates to the roles and responsibilities of school district boards, as well as the electorate itself. So we put a note in here that we thought was very important. It's the consensus of the commission that even under the provisions of larger systems as envisioned by Act 73, most of the current central functions of school boards and the electorate should stay the same. Listed below are recommendations that either require a change in law or that commission members feel need to be emphasized. So first, we felt the legislature should examine the laws governing annual meetings and ensure they comport with changes that are contemplated in Act 73 while providing as much opportunity for citizen participation as possible. Obviously, citizens are going to lose the right to vote in annual budgets unless it's a supplemental budget. So there's going to be some changes that the Legislative Council is going to have to help you folks with to make sure that the Green Book lines up with wherever you end up in terms of district configuration. We did say we think districts should be required to meaningfully engage with voters on budget use and development. So even though they're not going to actually develop their own budget plan for approval by the voters, once they get a certain amount, we feel it's very important that the public is involved in that. It can help them set priorities for their school districts in terms of how that money is going to be spent, what programs matter the most to those communities, so that there's actual authentic community feedback and engagement in the process to the degree possible. We also felt that compensation for school board members should be established at the state level. We think that the legislature could do that with a consultation from appropriate stakeholders. And we think it should be separate from the foundation formula. In other words, the education opportunity payments, to inform appropriate levels of compensation for board members and districts throughout the state. Consideration should be given to the size and scope of responsibility. Give an example here. School board members who serve a small single town district, if any of those still exist, may not get the same level of compensation of over school board members who serve boards with oversight of multiple schools and former school districts. Now, the reason we don't want this to be part of the foundation formula, in my experience, board members very seldom will raise their own pay, right? And if they do raise their pay, people are going to be like, well, it's taking money away from our kids. So we think that should be separated. If you go forward with much larger school districts than we currently have, it's going to be a lot of work for these volunteer school board members. And we think they should get some type of compensation and be protected from that. And we do think that these races, if we don't do that, may not be very competitive. And we want to make sure we have people running for school boards. The last research I saw is that almost 90% of school board elections in Vermont, either one person runs or nobody runs, and the board has to go out and recruit somebody. So we don't want to fall into that trap. We also felt that school district boards should continue to determine the education policies of the school districts within the constraints of state and federal law, which is current practice. And a little twist is we feel the new school board should have student members so that student perspective is taken into account when making decisions for the school system. So that's the second section. Any questions or comments from the committee on that?
Paul, I'm thinking about making sure I understand that, in the context of large districts that are contemplated by Act 73, you've said a couple of times in here that district board should continue to determine the educational policies of this school district. And I'm just trying to get my arms around what that means practically in the context of Act 73.
Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Right now in the state of Vermont, for example, let's use transportation. School districts don't have to provide transportation. The vast majority of them do, and they decide on a transportation policy for their whole system.
Yeah.
That's an example of that. So let's say you form a new school district that involves like a current supervisory union, a couple other school districts, and they're all combined together, lots of different governance structures. As that new board comes into place, they're going to have to set that policy. And it's probably going to be a little bit different than it was for each of those towns when they were on their own. And ultimately, that board will do that. That said, they still must follow, any state law or anything that's set as state board rule.
Yeah, okay. I get that they have to do it within the confines of I was just trying to get my arms around what some of the things would be that they'd be. And you gave an example. That's good.
Yeah, that's an example. Another example might be related to employee compensation, CBAs, what's going to be a probationary employee. Maybe you've got 4 districts that are joined together, and for their paraprofessionals, probationary in one district means 90 days, another district it means 60 days, another district it means 120 days. They all become one district. They're going to have to, those are a lot of the issues they're going to have to wrestle with. There's a lot of practical application that these school boards are going to have to wrestle with as they become new governance entities. Okay, to keep moving?
Yeah.
The next one, we had like no testimony. Nobody really seemed that interested in it. We could skip it if you want. So I'm joking there. So a process for communities served by a school to have voice in decisions regarding school closures and recommendations for what that process shall entail. This was the area that we heard the most comments in the commission. If you looked at the survey results that were forwarded with the report, there's about 5,000 of those. And this was the number one issue that was brought up. So let me walk you through this. First of all, the process for school closures initiated by the state that are set forth in Title 16, 165, the commission does not make any recommendations to change this statute. This is where the state board and the agency of education can come in and close the school, for some major safety concern, Maybe their roof's gone off, maybe they've got all kinds of mold and they have to close the school. That doesn't change at all. What we're talking about here is, as a commission, we can envision a time when a new, bigger school board may recommend that a school be closed or repurposed because of some local priority or community goals. And before a school board considers whether to close a school or parts of a school, the commission, we set forth basically a default recommended process, which could be altered by articles of agreement approved by the newly formed district as set forth in other considerations, paragraph 2 below that you'll see. So in other words, if they don't come up with a new governance plan that says how they would approach if they decide to close the school, then they would go back to these default articles. The first thing that we recommend is that the school board would form a steering committee to lead the work of considering potential school closure or repurposing. And the steering committee could have a school board member or two on it, but it also doesn't have to. That board, the school board would hold multiple meetings, no fewer than 3, with the potential school closure discussion on the agenda. We recommend this starts as early as possible. We didn't think there should be a statutory recommendation necessarily, but that unless there was a crisis situation, these discussions ideally should begin at least 18 months in advance of potentially closing a school or repurposing. And by repurposing, example would be, let's say you have a K-8 school. It's been a K-8 school for 100 years, and you decide in our new bigger system, that's just going to be a K-1-2 school. And the 3rd through 8th graders in that school are going to go someplace else. To make that level of change, we think there needs to be a lot of communication with the community so that everybody has the opportunity to share their concerns, support, or voices against whatever that proposal might be. We then said either an advisory vote or a public input survey should be held and conducted in the towns or cities directly affected by the potential school closure or repurposing. We could not agree on which one this should be. An advisory vote obviously means your town clerk has to be involved. There's some cost to that. A public input survey doesn't cost anything, but we can see times where either one of those or both of those would make sense. We feel the steering committee should make a recommendation or recommendations regarding school closure or repurposing to the school board. And then the decision as to whether or not close a school would be held by a majority vote of the entire school district. This is the citizens in all this new structure, whatever the structure might be. And that the ultimate decision should seek to ensure that students are afforded quality education opportunities in an affordable, sustainable, and equitable system. And then there would be the opportunity to appeal if 5% of the voters in the school district within 30 days asked to do that. And the appeal would not go to another vote of the community like it does now. The appeal would first be submitted to the Agency of Education, who would collect the complete record from the parties. And then they would send it to the state board, and the state board would have the final to say on whether or not the school was closed or repurposed. And I want to touch on one other part before we open it up. I'm going to read this verbatim. The commission notes that it has received many requests, and I don't know how many, hundreds probably, that it recommend a binding vote of the towns or cities served by a school that a district board is considering closing or repurposing. Instead, the commission trusts that people in the municipalities served by a school that is proposed to be closed or repurposed will use the opportunity to persuade the voters of the whole district to maintain the status quo if appropriate. In addition, the commission recommends the above appeal process, which creates the right of an appeal to the State Board of Education. Now, in the wake of Act 46, senators, a number of citizens seem to think that citizens can stop a school from closing just automatically by law. That's not the case. It's never been the case in Vermont. School boards have that authority. Where it has changed is under Act 46, many of the articles of agreement, remember the voluntary mergers, many school districts did put in their articles of agreement that you can't close this school or this school or this school unless the voters of that town agree to close it. So we felt this was the best approach forward to try to split the needle a little bit on that, to not give any municipality veto rights, but to also give them a fair opportunity to be heard by the larger school district community. Questions on section C?
Yeah, I guess so. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Jay, the vote by the majority of the entire school district for a closure or repurposing of the school, is that binding on the school board?
The full vote,
Yes. If it,
you know, I don't even know if we ever even really decided that. Actually, I think that's going to be up to you folks. I don't want to speak for the
what's
whole
the
commission on
purpose of the
that,
vote?
but I think it would be binding.
Because I think, a couple steps up, you have an input survey, right, to kind of get a
Yep.
litmus test, and then you have a vote. Okay,
Yeah, I think it would be binding. You may have to make some statutory changes to make that the case. And do remember that please remember, if there were articles of agreement that said differently, then the articles of agreement would hold the day when these new entities form.
okay, and again, you may have said it because you were moving pretty quick. Is that the case now that if within a district that they have a potential school closure or repurposing, that there is a binding public vote as opposed to school board vote?
No, it's up to the school board unless in their articles of agreement, when they formed under Act 46, they
Yeah.
put in their articles that each town had the veto power not to have their school closed. And many of them do have that. That's the issue in a few places right now where the boards are trying to close schools and one local community is saying everybody else thinks we should close, but we're not going to. And that community has veto power because that's what's in their articles of agreement.
Okay, then I'll take this to the next step. Do you have a recommendation on whether we should have like a template of binding processes across however many number of school districts we end up with, that they all operate with the same survey, voting, school board process?
I think that's up to you. We decided not to go that far. We decided to leave it up to you and just make recommendations. If I speak right now, I'm going to be sharing my opinion, not the commission's opinion on that, Senator.
And your opinion is what?
I thought you were going to ask that.
Well, you're welcome.
I think we should have a default standard.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I
And
will
what-
just say there, remember, the Supreme Court has upheld that it is your responsibility as the General Assembly. Any other questions or comments on section C?
No, just we're having a discussion that the district where I live, the board, after a process with the communities and with the entire district, voted to close 2 schools.
Yeah.
It
And other places have done that too.
took
I think in
about
Grand Isle.
It took a full year of process. And then they voted a few weeks ago to close a couple of small schools.
I saw that, Senator. Yeah, and Grand
Yeah.
Isle went through the same thing with Isle Lamont and North Hero.
Okay,
Section D, I won't spend a lot of time on. It basically set a process for monitoring the implementation, making sure it's transparent. So we had all of our meetings. We went all around the state. We also had surveys, and we're suggesting that to the degree possible, you folks keep all of your work right out front and transparent. We talk a little bit about the things that we think are the biggest focuses. And I'm just going to skip down to, we recommend that the AOE monitor the implementation of Act 73 by providing regular reports to you folks, to the legislative committees of jurisdiction. There may be more, but I'm thinking of Senate Finance, Senate Ed, Ways and Means, and House Education at least. And to the General Assembly at large. And then they provide regular implementation reports to the State Board of Education at its regularly scheduled monthly meetings. Now, we went into this as a commission, assuming that Act 73 in some way, shape, or form is going to be implemented, and districts are going to look different than they do right now. So that was our whole, our whole consideration as we put this forward. If nothing changes, then, obviously that would be different. But if there are going to be changes, we want to make sure Vermonters really have a clear, transparent understanding of what those changes are going to be, whether it's on the fiscal end, the governance end, or anything else. So that's basically all we really said in this section. Any questions on that? I mean, you're being real transparent, and I think we have to get Vermonters to have a good, solid understanding of whatever it is that you folks decide to do. And I think we have to have Vermonters on board before we do anything, because it is their education system.
I'm interested that you, and I like the fact that you sort of spent a little time defining equity and discussing sort of third of the way down page 13, the equity. And one of the things I've wondered about is how do we, within the confines of equity, how do we couple it, almost having it have the same meaning, the word excellence, so that we're always, so that excellence drives only one direction. I'm sorry, equity drives only one direction toward excellence. So, I do always want to make sure that we don't say, oh, you can't do that excellent thing because somebody else isn't. So I just want to, how do we ensure that, I know that's what you're talking about because you said it actually in the paragraph below, but how do we make sure that equity always means driving toward excellence?
I think
It's something this committee's been thinking about as sort of the theme that we used when we went around to schools this summer, December. It was summer then. It's how do we ensure we're always talking about excellence?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that's going to be really difficult in the first few years, the bigger, no, bigger doesn't matter. Let me rephrase that. The more change there is in the governance structure, and the more adjustments that the new systems have to make, the harder it's going to be to ensure equity moving towards excellence in the first few years. Because I think there's going to be a lot of turmoil. I'm really worried about the dismantling the system. I'm going to give you some testimony on that in my other role at here in the near future, maybe next Tuesday. So I think the more stable we can make the transition process, the better. And at the VPA, we have a saying called direction, alignment, and commitment. We call it DAC. And we believe you have your mission, you have your focus. Then you try to make sure everybody's aligned in that same direction and everybody's committed to that same direction. And if you try to do 20 things well, you can't. You've got to try to do 3 or 4 things really, really well. And as a school system, you got to be really clear on what your mission is and the direction you want to go. And you notice that we put inputs and outputs in here. We are definitely concerned about outputs. We want to see kids reading at a high level in the younger grades. We want to see high level courses and opportunities. I think the whole commission is in agreement with the secretary that wherever possible, we want to provide more opportunities for kids. We want to see more of our kids that want to go on to college and be successful. We also want to see kids going to trade schools and using CTEs to get into high paying jobs there. What we're not convinced is that, for example, NAEP test scores are really that important. We think local assessments are much more important, and we think the research kind of supports that. But I do think, Senator, your point about working towards excellence is really important, because if we don't do that, you're going to digress to the mean, and we don't want that either. We want to hold high standards, but with high standards have to come high level supports, instructionally and resource based, for students that are struggling and for students that are already achieving at a real good level, so that they keep achieving even higher. Kind of a roundabout answer. I apologize for that. I don't have any specifics.
Actually, I find that answer helpful.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Okay. The next section, we were told in our charge, what other considerations do we want to share with you folks, with the General Assembly? And so we had a couple. The first one is a major focus of 73 is to improve the quality of education while controlling increased costs. And so we had unanimous agreement that regardless of what governance structures we end up utilizing, And we put here supervisory unions, school districts, supervisory districts, BOCES. And this was before the redistricting task force mentioned BOCES. The commission makes the following recommendations. We believe that students who change their residence within a school governance structure should be allowed to stay at the same school if feasible, unless the student's educational team decides that moving to another school in the system is likely to benefit the student. So I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to use my old district just because I live here. When I was a superintendent, if a kid moved from Berkshire, the town I live in, to Enosburg, he could actually move closer to the Berkshire school, still be in Enosburg, and have to switch schools because they were different school districts. And our kids who were most transient tended to be kids. They might be migrant farmers. They might be people that were receiving, a lot of people receiving free and reduced lunch, a lot of students who didn't have a lot of financial supports. They're the kids that move the most. And, you know, when we would do grade checks through K through 8, we had kids that were moving 6, 7 times. Sometimes they left our complete system, like they moved to Swanton. Okay, we can't do anything about that, right? But if a kid moved from Berkshire to Enosburg, why not let the kid keep going to school in Berkshire? So the committee was unanimous that whatever structures we got to do a better job of letting kids go to school and not have to switch schools, especially when they might even be closer to the school that they were in before. And supervisory unions right now don't allow that. So if we're going to keep SUs, we got to find a way to fix that. That's a fatal flaw, and it hurts our most vulnerable kids repeatedly. The second big one that came up for the commission was that we feel that all licensed educators should be employees of the overall school governance structure, not of a single school within a larger governance structure. Whatever that structure is, that would allow superintendents to better deploy educators to meet student needs, and it'll provide more job protections for teachers in small schools. This already happens with special education teachers, and we suggest this change should apply to all licensed teachers. By way of example, earlier this year, I got a phone call from a school that has about 200 kids, and they have a full-time nurse. And she went out, I think on maternity leave, but it might have been medical leave. They have 2 other schools in that supervisory union. And the superintendent called me and said, what do I do? The nurse refuses to work in the other schools. And she's a full-time nurse, and she's in a school of like 75 kids, and they've decided that they wanted a full-time nurse. And he said, I can't even bring her to the other schools for a day or two. And that's a flaw with any system like that. So somehow we've got to make these school districts, the employee of the whole bigger thing, whatever you folks create as a bigger thing. Because right now the redundancy is killing us. I hear Senator Heffernan talk about that all the time, and he's right. We've got to have a way that we can share staff. And if we're not allowed to share staff, then we're not going to get the economies of scale that we want to get.
Senator Weeks had a question about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. So I know you choose your words carefully. So I'm wondering, when you say overall school governance structure, it's a little vague. Do you mean the single district or all of the districts statewide? Are you talking about like a state employee, or are you talking about?
Oh, I see what you're asking. No, I'm talking about the new structure, whatever you make it, that has a board overseeing a bunch of schools. That structure would be able to share those employees. So
An individual district, an employee of an individual district, a new individual, whatever size that may be. One
Yeah.
or.
Yeah. I mean, if I had it my way, we would not have supervisor unions. We would just have school districts. No other state uses supervisor unions the way we do, and we get rid of a whole bunch of redundancies. We'd have less business office staff, eventually less superintendents. I mean, we'd better share staff. So ideally, we'd hopefully have less staff, less provisional licenses. But that's me. As a full group, as a commission, we didn't really care what it was called. We just said common sense is the boss has got to be able to share employees in a way that makes sense over the schools that the boss oversees.
Okay. So following on that premise, did the commission ever explore whether teachers should be employees of a state organization?
No.
Never.
Never.
State salaries, no, state standardized, no, okay. You mean
No.
you didn't touch it or you didn't agree with it?
We touched it and it was clear there was going to be no agreement in that, and we didn't spend any time on it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The
So
commission also, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in terms of a teacher or a licensed employee moving from one school to another, that's actually could be done now if the contract was clear to that effect in the district, right? Because they're actually hired at the district level by the superintendent. And they
No, they're
could,
hired at the district level by the superintendent, but they're not hired at the supervisory union level by the superintendent.
oh, that's, okay, I see what you're saying.
That's the issue. So
Within
like,
Yeah, within a current district, they actually could be required to do that if it was clear in the contract that that was possible.
well, when they're current SU, they could too. So let's say I'll use a real example. In Berkshire, as superintendent of Franklin Northeast, I took Berkshire and Montgomery, and I created a position that was a music teacher for the two positions, hired them at the supervisory union level, and that person can go back and forth between Montgomery and Berkshire. Can't work in any of the other schools in this system, but could work in those systems. So the more we can give superintendents the latitude to share staff by having them all be employed by the same employer, it's gonna help with all those things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next part of it was, and I know Representative Conlon's not there. He has said a bunch of times the 4,000 to 8,000 thing is as practicable. We had so many people complaining about that. People in Vermont, a lot of people think that the only answer is 4,000, 8,000, that the General Assembly is not going to listen to any other numbers. So we felt that, if anything, the General Assembly should assuage those fears, those concerns, and just say, that was a guideline. We might have districts of 1,000 kids. We might have districts of more. I think of Canaan, I don't know what we do there. I want to make sure that they have opportunities, but they're not close to anything else. So we just felt that was worth noting and making sure that we don't get stuck on a number. And in my testimony next week, when I come in from the BPA, I'm going to talk about a different number range that I'm hoping you'll consider. And the next thing is, when districts are merged, we think there needs to be a reasonable period of time to let them develop articles of agreement for how they're going to operate. And then if they can't, senators, then we think the state board has to have a default, like we talked about before. And it's, if you can't come up with agreement amongst yourselves, then you will have to follow the State Board of Education default, similar to what we tried to do with Act 46. Only it would be binding and school districts could not divorce from it as they have in the past. Lastly, and then I'll take any questions at all, we wanted to give you some feedback from what Vermonters told us. The respondents were pretty clear. And again, we had around 5,000 responses, and plus a lot of people online. They do want a public education system that's equitable, inclusive, and student-centered. They do want all kids to have access to well-funded schools, safe environments, all those things we all believe in, and that Secretary Saunders has spoken very eloquently about, regardless of geography or identity. However, the respondents, Vermonters, overwhelmingly felt that the initial education reform process was too rushed, disorganized, and had inadequate time for deep community engagement, particularly from vulnerable or historically underserved groups and those with boots on the ground, educators, students, and local boards. So these are the survey results. Respondents also overwhelmingly felt that Vermont's education reform efforts must slow down and center the voices of those most impacted by the proposed changes. And again, then we're talking about students, families, and educators, by prioritizing equity, belonging, and local community identity over rushed structural changes that risk deepening disparities. The next part is just how surveys work. Talks about direct impact groups, secondary groups, and community impact groups. I'm not going to spend any time on that. And then I'll finish with, in the public input sessions and public comments, there were numerous concerns were raised about the governor's education overhaul plan. We did try telling people that the 5 districts was a starting conversation, but the concerns thematically were that the plan by most Vermonters, at least that reached out to us, is seen as top-down, inequitable, and lacking community input. And nothing in any of the conversations has indicated any change in that. As you know, there was broad opposition, Republicans, Democrats, to the 5-district plan. And so accordingly, as you folks move towards forward with Act 73 implementation, we think you need to take the time to ensure the educational system transformation is transparent, upfront, and is easily understandable for all Vermonters, and that it'll solve the issues that we're tasked with addressing. So we strongly encourage the members of the General Assembly to carefully review our report and all the accompanying materials, including the surveys. And it's clear that any transformational decisions as contemplated by Act 73 are in your purview, as I've told every Vermont citizen I've talked to. It's up to the legislature and the governor. That said, as you know, Vermonters care deeply about public education and local control. In order for a major change to be successful, a critical mass of Vermont citizens have to be supportive of that change. So we encourage you to take the time to ensure that major policy pursuits have the positive overall intent they claim to. Last night I walked out of a gymnasium. I still ref games up this area for the kids in 7th and 8th grade because we can't get any refs. And 3 people asked me about Act 73 in the lobby. And I said, "Can you just tell them to leave our schools alone?" And I said, it's not my job to tell them that. And I talked to them about you're the same people that are telling me that we pay too much for taxes. So the General Assembly is in kind of a quandary here, and they're going to try to find their best path forward. But people are talking about it, which I guess is a good thing. And so I would leave it with that from the commission's perspective and take any final questions or thoughts that you might have.
Senator Heffernan.
My thought is the silent majority. Surveys often are filled out by people that are truly concerned. So we have 5,000 people, which relatively speaking is a low number for how many people that are in this state, but it does show the concerns that are out there. My concern is the silent majority that have just been paying their taxes and made their point during the last election that they get hurt. Nobody wants to rush, and this is more of a statement than a question, obviously, but I think both committees, House and Senate, have heard, take it slow, and we're moving at glacier speed, that we are taking it slow, and that we're going to try to address everybody's concerns, but like anything, everything doesn't always get covered, but we are going to do the best that our committees can do.
Yeah, let me respond to that with 2 quick statements. Thank you for saying that. First is Afton Partners Group, who did the survey work, said that for a state our size to get 5,000 responses in essentially a 6-day period was unheard of. They were amazed at how many responses we got. However, to the silent majority part, you are absolutely right in that we don't know what the silent majority really knows, because a high percentage of the surveys that were filled out, and I'm trying to be transparent here, were by people that work in the education field and by parents who have kids in school. And the results do show that. So we don't really know for sure where, I don't know, 80% of our community members don't have kids in schools. So, I think we do have to really take their concerns into consideration too, to your point, Senator.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So maybe more for Tuesday than today, because you'll be in a different role then. And I guess it's not a surprise to hear you say that, if you reference the quandary of taking time to get it right, which is the way certainly I have always wanted to legislate, and I think most of us do. And yet we have, on the flip side of that, we have the situation where we've been buying down the tax rate every year for the last several years. And I think if we do it again this year, I can't imagine it will happen another time after this. So we, and in fact, I think the only way we can justify doing it all this year is if we really have put something in place that is going to drive down or keep down the rate of increase. in school budgets so that voters, because you know, as I always say about this, my biggest fear is voters taking immediate action to budgets. And we want to make sure that we don't put them in a position where that's what actually ends up happening. So we have the quandary of wanting to get it right, which, you know, I get the longer term for that. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we're doing something effectively right now to guarantee that we're bringing down that rate of increase. And I will also say that, like, just saying, well, take this out and take this out and put it in the general fund doesn't help because there's no money in the general fund. So, and I get the lot, there's logic, I get the logic, potentially. And I also, but that's just the dilemma, you call it the quandary, that this committee and the whole legislature is facing. And so at the same time, we're trying to do the longer term work and get it right. We have to be thinking about how we're going to, with some immediacy, begin to bring down the rate of increase so that voters can have confidence that we're getting off this treadmill that we've been on the last several years of putting money, as I call it, into the funnel, or paying down the rate, then only makes it worse the next year as we are experiencing year to year. So that's more of there's really not a question, that's just a thought and something we can talk about more on Tuesday, perhaps.
Yeah, that sounds good. I did send you and a few people just some thoughts that I will touch on Tuesday. I've looked at the modeling on the maps on the financial end, especially in Chittenden County, and yeah, I'm going to spend some time thinking about it over the weekend. I'm really worried about it, and I don't see an easy answer, especially for districts that are already, you know, they're paying their employees pretty well and already have really full classes. So I think there might have to be a regionalized approach. I'll make suggestions, but I'm really glad you guys have to make the decision, to be honest with you.
All right. Thank you very much for coming in. That
Of course.
was a good discussion. So I enjoyed the discussion. I think everybody else did. So we can go off that and maybe just stay on the meeting for 10 minutes. We'll start the next quick break. Bill.